Someone offered to help you last week. Maybe it was a coworker reaching for the box you were already carrying. Maybe it was a friend asking if you needed anything after a rough day. Maybe it was something smaller than that. A hand extended in your direction with nothing behind it but kindness, and something in you recoiled. Not visibly. You are too practiced for that. On the outside, you smiled and said, "No thanks, I have got it." But inside, something tightened. A wall went up so fast, you barely noticed it happening, because you have been saying, "I have got it," for so long that the words do not even feel like a choice anymore. They feel like breathing. Here is what nobody tells you about that moment, that flinch, that reflexive rejection of help. It is not strength. It is not discipline. It is not the sign of someone who has their life together. It is the scar tissue of a wound so old you forgot you were ever cut. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly where that wound came from, what it is costing you right now, and why the thing you call independence is actually the loneliest prison you have ever built. But first, you need to understand what is actually living inside that reflex, because it is not what you think. There is a creature in the ocean that most people misunderstand, the hermit crab. Most assume it is a small, armored animal scuttling across the seafloor, but the shell is not part of its body. The hermit crab is one of the softest, most vulnerable creatures in the sea. It has no exoskeleton of its own, no natural armor, no defense, so it borrows one. It finds an empty shell left behind by something that died, and it crawls inside, and it carries that dead thing's protection everywhere it goes. This is you, not in some vague, motivational sense, in a precise, clinical, almost surgical sense. The independence you wear is not something you grew. It is something you found after something in your life died. Safety died. Trust died. The reasonable expectation that someone would show up when you needed them, that died. And in the absence of that protection, you built your own. You found a shell, and you have been carrying it ever since. But here is what makes the hermit crab a devastating metaphor for what is happening inside you. As the crab grows, its borrowed shell does not grow with it. The armor that once protected it begins to crush it. The crab faces a choice: stay in the shell that is slowly killing it, or shed the shell entirely and be completely naked, completely soft, completely exposed to every predator in the ocean while it searches for a new one. Most hermit crabs die during this transition, not from the predators, from the hesitation. And you have been hesitating for years, maybe decades, because somewhere deep in your nervous system, exposure equals death, and so you stay in the shell, even as it gets tighter, even as it starts to hurt, even as you can feel yourself being compressed into a shape that is not yours. John Bowlby, the British psychoanalyst who spent his career studying how early bonds shape adult behavior, had a term for what you are doing. He called it compulsive self-reliance, not independence, not strength. Compulsive self-reliance. The word compulsive matters. It means you are not choosing this. You are being driven to it by a system that learned, long before you had language, that needing someone is the most dangerous thing you can do. There is a study that will make you uncomfortable. Researchers found that 78% of individuals displaying hyper-independent behaviors experienced at least one significant traumatic event before the age of 18. Not 78% of people with diagnosed PTSD. 78% of people who simply cannot ask for help. The kind of people who will drive themselves to the emergency room with a broken wrist rather than call someone. The kind of people who would rather fail alone than succeed with support. That number tells a story. And the story almost always begins in a room where a child needed something and no one came. Maybe your parent was physically present, but emotionally vacant. They fed you and clothed you and made sure you got to school on time. But when you cried, the room got colder. When you needed comfort, you got instructions. When you needed softness, you got logic. You learned to read the temperature of a room before you learned to read books. And you became fluent in a language no child should have to speak. The language of calibrating your needs to someone else's capacity. Slowly, without anyone teaching you the words, you absorbed the most dangerous lesson a child can learn. My needs are a burden. My vulnerability is an inconvenience. The safest version of me is the one that never asks for anything. That lesson did not arrive as a single moment. It arrived as 1,000 small refusals. 1,000 times a hand was not extended. 1,000 times a door stayed closed when it should have opened. And by the time you were old enough to name what was missing, you had already built an entire identity around not needing it. Or maybe it was more explicit than that. Maybe someone left, a parent, a caregiver, someone who was supposed to be the floor beneath you, and one day the floor was gone and you were falling and no one caught you. And what did you do? You did what any organism does when the environment proves hostile. You adapted. You learned to catch yourself. You learned to be your own floor. Bowlby identified a specific dynamic he called role inversion, where a child is forced to become the emotional caretaker of the very person who was supposed to care for them. The child becomes the parent. Not because they wanted to, because someone had to. And in doing so, the child's nervous system receives a message louder than any words. You are on your own. Act accordingly. What is devastating about this is not that the child suffered. Children are remarkably resilient. What is devastating is that the adaptation worked. Being hyper-independent kept you safe when nothing else would. It got you through. The problem is that survival strategies do not come with expiration dates. The software you installed at age 7 is still running at age 35, and it is consuming everything. Here is where it gets uncomfortable, because hyper-independence does not just feel like a survival mechanism. It feels like an identity. It feels like who you are. You take pride in it. You have built an entire self-concept around not needing anyone. You are the one people call when everything falls apart. You are the one who handles it, the fixer, the rock. The person who never asks for anything because you never have to, and the world rewards you for this. Your boss loves your self-sufficiency. Your friends admire your composure. Society tells you this is what a strong person looks like. But Donald Winnicott, the British psychoanalyst who studied how children construct identity under pressure, identified something that will unsettle you. He called it the false self, a personality structure built not from authentic desire, but from environmental demand. The false self is not a lie exactly. It is a performance so thorough that the performer forgets they are performing. And the tragedy of the false self is not that it does not work. The tragedy is that it works beautifully. People believe it. They admire it. They depend on it. And the person behind it slowly disappears. Carl Jung saw the same pattern from a different angle. He called it inflation of the persona. The persona is the mask we wear in the world, a necessary tool for social functioning. But when the mask fuses to the face, when you can no longer tell where the performance ends and you begin, that is when the shadow grows. Because everything you suppress to maintain the mask, every need you deny, every moment of softness you swallow, does not vanish. It gets stored, and it builds pressure. Have you noticed what happens to you in the rare moments when the mask slips? When you are exhausted enough, or sick enough, or drunk enough that the performance falters? The emotion that surfaces is not sadness, it is rage. a fury so disproportionate to the situation that it frightens even you. That rage is the shadow of your independence. It is every unmet need you pretended not to have, screaming from the basement of your psyche. The question you need to sit with is this: if your independence is real, if it is a genuine expression of who you are, then why does it require so much energy to maintain? Here is the truth you have been avoiding. And I know you have been avoiding it because avoiding uncomfortable truths is exactly what hyper-independence is designed to do. You are not independent. You are preemptively abandoned. You did not choose solitude. You chose it before someone else could choose it for you. Every time you refuse help, you are not demonstrating strength. You are flinching. You are a 7-year-old in an adult body, still bracing for the moment when the person you need will not show up. So you made sure you would never need anyone again, and you called that power. Read that again, because your first instinct right now is to argue with it, to tell yourself that no, you genuinely prefer handling things alone, that you are built differently, that you are just wired this way. But that is the compulsion talking. That is the shell tightening. Bowlby was explicit about this. The avoidant individual does not lack the need for connection. The avoidant individual has learned to suppress the need for connection because expressing it was punished. The need is still there. It is still running. It is just buried under so many layers of armor that you have convinced yourself it does not exist. And here is what makes this a shadow, in the Jungian sense. The thing you are most proud of, your self-sufficiency, is the thing that is most deeply wounded. Your greatest strength is your greatest defense mechanism wearing a different outfit. That is the nature of shadow. It does not hide in your weaknesses. It hides in the things you would never question, the things you build monuments to, the things you put on your dating profile and your resume and your tombstone. I can handle anything alone. That is not a statement of capability. That is a confession of damage. And until you hear it as such, you will keep building the prison and calling it a castle. Think about the last time you were truly overwhelmed, not mildly stressed. Overwhelmed, drowning. What did you do? You doubled down. You worked harder. You solved it yourself at 2 a.m. with coffee and willpower and the grim satisfaction of proving once again that you did not need anyone. And when it was over, when you had clawed your way through it alone, you felt a rush, not of accomplishment, of relief. The same relief a person feels when they confirm that the thing they feared most did not happen. You did not need help, and therefore you were not abandoned. The cycle completed itself, and the shell tightened one more notch. Let me show you what the shell is doing to you. Because you have been inside it so long, you cannot feel the compression anymore. But the people around you can. Your relationships are shallow, not because you are shallow, because you have made depth impossible. Every time someone tries to get close, your system interprets closeness as threat. Intimacy requires vulnerability. Vulnerability requires need. Need is the one thing your entire psychological architecture was designed to eliminate. So you let people get exactly close enough to not be alone, but never close enough to actually be known. You maintain what psychologists call pseudo-intimacy, the appearance of connection without the substance of it. And the cruelest part is that you know, in your quietest moments, you know the closeness is not real. You know the relationships are missing something. But admitting that would mean admitting you need something. And that is the one thing the shell will not allow. The body keeps its own accounting of this. The nervous system that learned to never rely on another human being is not just a psychological state. It is a physiological one. Stephen Porges, the neuroscientist behind polyvagal theory, demonstrated that our nervous system has three modes: one for safety and social connection, one for fight or flight, and one for total shutdown. Where does that leave you? In a chronic state between the second and the third, mobilized enough to function, shut down enough to never fully connect. Your cortisol is elevated. Your capacity for rest is compromised. You are running your engine at redline and calling it productivity. And the loneliness, that is the cost nobody talks about, because the hyper-independent person is not allowed to be lonely. Loneliness would mean you need people. So instead, you call it peace. You call it solitude. You call it preference. But at 3 a.m, when the performance has no audience, something surfaces. A hollowness that self-sufficiency cannot fill. An ache that no amount of competence can touch. You have solved every problem in your life, except the one problem that matters. You have made yourself unreachable, and you are reaching for nothing. Remember the hermit crab, the one being crushed by its own shell. Here is what marine biologists observed about the crabs that survived the transition, the ones that shed the old shell and live long enough to find a new one. They do not do it alone. Hermit crabs form what scientists call vacancy chains. When one crab finds a shell that is too large for it, it waits nearby. Other crabs gather. They line up, smallest to largest, and when the right-sized crab claims the new shell, it leaves its old one behind for the next in line. The entire system depends on one thing: the willingness to be seen, the willingness to stand naked and soft in the presence of others who are also naked and soft, the willingness to trust that vulnerability is not the end, it is the mechanism. This is what Bowlby called earned security. The recognition that you can develop secure attachment even if you were not given it as a child, but it cannot be earned alone. That is the paradox that will save your life or ruin it. The wound was created in relationship. The healing must also happen in relationship. You cannot think your way to trust. You cannot self-help your way to intimacy. You cannot read enough books or watch enough videos to replace the experience of being held by another person and not destroyed by it. Jung understood this. He wrote that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. The transformation you need is not more independence. It is the terrifying, necessary experience of depending on someone and discovering that the world does not end, that the floor holds, that the hand extended toward you is not a trap. This does not mean trusting everyone. It does not mean collapsing your boundaries or becoming dependent. It means allowing one person, one carefully chosen person, to see you without the shell, to sit with you in the softness, to witness the part of you that the 7-year-old swore would never be seen again, and to stay. Start small. The next time someone offers help, let them. Do not perform gratitude. Do not immediately reciprocate so the debt is cleared. Just receive. Notice what happens in your body. The tightness, the urge to take back control, the voice that whispers, "This is dangerous." That voice is not you. That voice is the child. And the child deserves to learn that the world has changed, even if the nervous system has not caught up yet. Then go further. Tell one person one true thing about how you are actually doing. Not the curated version. Not the version that sounds like you have it handled. The version that scares you. The version where you admit that the walls are not protecting you. They are suffocating you. Watch what happens. Watch whether the person runs or stays. Because the data your nervous system is operating on was collected 20 or 30 years ago by a child who had no other options. The data is old. The predictions are wrong. and the only way to update the system is to give it new evidence. There is something Bowlby wrote late in his career that most people overlook. He said that the capacity to make intimate emotional bonds with other individuals is a principal feature of effective personality, functioning, and mental health. Not a luxury, not a bonus for people who happen to be emotionally available, a principal feature, meaning that without it, you are not functioning, you are just performing function. You are a machine that runs, but produces nothing it can keep. Your hyper-independence kept you alive. Honor that. It was the best strategy available to a child who had no other options. But you are not that child anymore. And the strategy that saved you is now the strategy that is starving you. The shell that protected you at 5 is crushing you at 35. And you already know this. You knew it before you clicked on this video. You knew it at 3 in the morning when the competence and the control and the carefully maintained distance from every other human being was not enough. You knew it in the silence. You just did not have the language for it. Now you do. Here is what nobody tells you about the hermit crab. The moment between shells, that moment of total exposure that the crab fears more than anything. Marine biologists have another name for it. They call it the growth interval. Because the crab cannot grow inside the old shell. Growth only happens in the opening, in the vulnerability, in the place where nothing is protecting you and everything is possible. You have spent your whole life avoiding that moment, building thicker walls, finding harder shells, perfecting the performance of someone who does not need. But the growth was always on the other side of the need. It was always waiting for you to set the armor down. Not because the armor was wrong, because you outgrew it. And the only thing more courageous than surviving alone is choosing not to. If this found you at the right moment, write in the comments, I outgrew the shell. And if you are willing, tell me what you were protecting when you stopped letting people in. Not what you told yourself, what you were actually protecting. The softest thing in the ocean is also the one that grows.